go back and look at what Mussolini was doing in Italy with, the Everybody Together program, otherwise known as fascism. I mean, that's what Mark Carney stands for, and what Mark Carney's stakeholder capitalism and crony capitalism stand for. It's nothing more or less than a fascist program that he intends to foist on Alberta, and we need to get out before he does.
Sydney Vizard for Rebel News here in Calgary, Alberta for the Courage to Listen Town Hall, sponsored by the United Conservative Party, with many at the Alberta Prosperity Project organizing this event. That's why we're here to talk to some of these speakers at this event to find a little bit more about their perspective now, currently, as to the independence movement sweeping across Western Canada.
Our project moving forward, quite frankly, is, to show Albertans that we are going to be significantly better off outside of Canada than we are in it.
What is your key message here tonight?
That independence if necessary, but not necessarily independence. If Ottawa continues to be an inhibitor of the aspirations of the province to utilize their natural rights to develop themselves and the resources, then they should go their own way. If there could be some form of collaboration, fine, but it's not looking good for that second choice right now.
Alberta is going to be far better off outside of Canada than within it. And the fact that an independent Alberta will have a fiscal capacity surplus of between, $30 and $48 billion a year, after tripling the amount of money spent on Indigenous people in Alberta, fully funding an Alberta Armed Forces, external affairs, immigration, et cetera. So there's just no economic case for Alberta to stay in Canada, period. And when people actually see the numbers, and what we're talking about, they're going to understand that there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to stay.
The sponsors have put together a great group of speakers that are giving people an awful lot of things to think about as Albertans ultimately prepare themselves for what the Premier even says will be a referendum question sometime in 2026.
Alberta needs to become independent. And the particular theme I was talking about today had to do with how many things Albertans have tried in the past to reform Canada, and the door's been shut. And we've tried so many things. And in particular, I focus on the Reform Party of Canada and Senate Reform in Canada. These were things we worked on for several years, and they were not successful, not because there was anything wrong with the people doing the reforming from Alberta, but because Central Canada was not interested in the kind of reforms we wanted. And since we've tried these things and we can't get anything done this way, I think the only option we have left is for Alberta to become independent.
We understand why people are upset and frustrated and ready to, divorce the bastard, but we have to understand how much things cost here at home too. So if you want to be strong, you have to make sure you've got a good fortress. And so I recently even wrote an article about Fortress Alberta and why we need to keep our own budgets balanced, why we can't keep going and piling on more and more debt provincially, and why it's super important to be strong here in order to stand up for ourselves. Now, that could be standing up to Ottawa directly, more sovereignty in the sense that we have more control over what happens within our own province, all that good stuff. The main point here is that even if Alberta were to declare independence, it's not as if everything is suddenly a lottery win. Everything is still going to be a hassle, and it's still going to cost money. And so I wanted to focus on provincial finances.
Alberta needs to leave the country. Canada is essentially unfixable, I think, at this point, and Alberta deserves to save itself, but in so doing, I think Alberta is the best chance for Canada to be able to save itself. And by that, I mean this. Canada's problems are so deeply entrenched that only a political earthquake is really going to make it face up to its problems. And so what Alberta could do if they decided to resolve to leave and pass the referendum, it could cause a cascade, a domino effect, and other provinces and people around the country might start to think that Canada isn't viable. Now, I don't think Canada is all that viable right now anyway, but Alberta's departure would certainly bring that into focus.
The federal election has a lot of people thinking about Alberta's place in Confederation, and I think there's a wide range of different views about how to go about improving Alberta's position. I talked tonight about how people, I think, roughly fit into 4 categories right now. First, people who recognize that there's a problem with Alberta's situation, but they've given up on any chance of being able to fix it, and therefore they want to leave Canada. Second, I think there's a segment of people who recognize that there's a problem, and they're trying to fix it, but they're skeptical or not really believing much anymore that it can be fixed. Third, I think there's a group of people who recognize that there's a problem and are trying to fix it and do still believe that it can be fixed. And then fourth, I think there's a segment of the population who don't realize that there's a problem that needs fixing to begin with. We don't really know quite how many people fit into those categories. But I think what's going to be important in the coming months is what Ottawa's reaction to Alberta's demands are. Because if Ottawa is open to pursuing policies that will treat Alberta more fairly, well then clearly those who have hope that this problem can be fixed are correct and will probably gather more support to their positions. But if Ottawa continues to be transigent and refuse to even consider Alberta's concerns, and if the general public continues the trends of kind of mocking Alberta for even saying that there's a problem, then I think that will push more and more people towards the idea that this can't be fixed. And I think that's when separation really becomes a much bigger factor in the discussion. So it'll be interesting to see what Ottawa's reaction in the coming months will be. I think with Mark Carney and the new government, there are some people in that camp who are saying, well, no, they've said good things. We should give them a chance to deliver. But it really is a last chance, right? They've got one last chance to deliver, and then I think there's a very large number of Albertans that are hoping that it will actually be delivered this time. And if it doesn't, I think things could start to move pretty quickly.
The strongest message I want to convey here is to say to Albertans that they do not need to separate to take over a lot of rights. I believe they've been misinformed on what the Constitution can do for them. And they haven't played the Westminster system game that Quebec plays. And they often have resentment against Quebec for doing it when they actually can do it as well. Now, it's a bit the tale of two brothers, with Daddy leaving the keys of the 65 Mustang on the table and the other one screaming at the other because they always take the car. No? So.
Well, and you highlighted some of the examples in the meeting when you were presenting. Could you just tell us, so what are some of these things that Albertans should specifically be looking at to say, oh, Quebec has a good deal here, we should be replicating specifically that?
Well, we have to start by controlling our finance. So first thing first, collect our taxes. Second thing, don't stop sending billions to Ottawa for pension plan. Third thing is that stop collecting our royalties on oil at the CIBC. No, we have an ATB. We have credit unions in this province, provincially regulated. It's absurd to send that to one of the big five.
And a lot of the tension that Albertans feel right now, and obviously there's the large talk of separation, comes from this re-election of the Liberal Party of Canada. And obviously Prime Minister Trudeau is a predecessor. Now we have Prime Minister Mark Carney. Do you think that's going to make much of a difference for Albertans?
Well, I believe that Carney is way more dangerous than Trudeau. We had the puppet, now we have the handler.
Those who don't want Alberta to separate should be working as hard as they possibly can to get fairness for Alberta and move us closer to the middle. Because the closer we get to the middle, the less likely it is that Albertans will want to separate.
We have enough people to actually have a referendum based on the new rules. So we're going to file our motion when they actually ratify the new bill, and we'll see where it goes from there. This is not one of our town halls. This is actually a UCP town hall. I'm a UCP chair. So, we're just exploring the legal way to make Alberta a better, richer place.
And I saw that on the website that this is largely a UCP-sponsored event. And the UCP, their leader, of course, Premier Danielle Smith, is stuck strong to that Sovereign Alberta within a United Canada line. How does that overlay play at an event like this?
Well, I mean, the Premier has to be the Premier of Alberta. She represents all the people, so that's her job to do that. And you know what? We're just open to exploring other areas so that Alberta can get the best deal possible. And I think that the best deal possible would be an independent Alberta right now, based on the current political situation in Canada.
I'm not sure that there's really a line to draw at this particular point in time. One of the things that MLA Eric Bouchard said when he introduced the evening was that they had invited very pro-federalist, very sovereign-oriented, even monarchists, and they opted not to show up. I appreciate that Calgary Lougheed and the other sponsors of this event are trying to create a balanced approach.
I think there's some real issues with, I think the Premier said she's giving, Canada another 4 months. And I think it's pretty clear that Carney's not going to be coming through and giving Premier Smith whatever she wants, or anything that she wants. So it'll be interesting to see where we're at 4 months from now in the context of Premier Smith's support for independence. I'm very clear on the fact that she understands that the overwhelming overwhelming majority of her membership support independence, and that the UCP, regardless of her position, saying that a strong Alberta within Canada is her position. It's not the position of the majority of her membership, and that's something that she's going to have to be concerned about on a going forward basis.
And do you see the recent by-election results in Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills as an early indicator as to how a referendum might go?
Absolutely not. I don't see any connection at all, actually. No. I know all the people involved, but they're not APP. And, their goal was to form another political party. Our goal is to educate people and get people thinking about an independent Alberta.
At this point in time, prior to when we even know what the referendum question is, let alone when we've had a referendum, I'm just not sure there's a lot of appetite for a separatist party. I think that what we're looking at right now is whether people believe that the United Conservative Party is the party that represents their conservative interests. And I think that Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills, perhaps the most conservative riding in the province, would say that Alberta Conservatives want to support the UCP.
Well, the Separatist or the Independence Party won. The UCP won. 65% of the membership of UCP is pro-independence. So, I think it was more a testament to, Premier Smith's continued popularity in Alberta, and the degree to which Cam Davies, was a weak candidate, and that the Republican Party brand is, somewhat toxic to a lot of Albertans that see it as being too pro-American, and that Cam Davies, personally, as a candidate, as a candidate was kind of a questionable choice given his background and previous convictions for election fraud.
And Premier Smith has also made a recent announcement following through with her Alberta Accord plans. What do you make of the new steps that she's taking?
I think that it's going to be interesting to see what the Alberta Next panel comes up with over the next few months. It isn't that many years since Jason Kenney and his government did the same thing, but we've had a fair amount of history happen in that 6-year time frame. So I'm really keen to hear what that group come up with on various topics across the province through their engagements all across the province with multiple Albertans.
A lot of us were very unimpressed with Premier Smith, announcing her What's Next panel, for the summer. Quite frankly, she was elected, as far as we're concerned, with a mandate to bring all of the Alberta pension money back from CPP. She has a mandate to, and the legislative authority to initiate a provincial police force, collect all taxes in Alberta, issue provincial gun licenses. Less talk, more action. We'd like to see her actually doing things as opposed to just planning on talking about it.
We don't take a position for or against independence. For many decades, the federal government is not respecting the Constitution. As just one example, there are many. The Constitution of Canada says that healthcare is exclusively a provincial responsibility, and yet we've got the Canada Health Act in Ottawa dictating that every province must have a dysfunctional, inefficient government monopoly, and the provinces are not free to pursue better healthcare policies because they're prohibited from doing so by Ottawa. So there's an example of the federal government just not respecting the Constitution. I don't think there would be much of a Quebec separatist or Alberta separatist movement if the federal government actually respected the 1867 Constitution with its division of powers.
But in order to have a fortress here in Alberta, we have to be fiscally sound. We have to be strong here at home.
Historically, whenever Canada has been through major bursts of real progress, it's always been when the provinces historically, especially since the 1950s onward, have taken their natural rights through the BNA Act, utilizing things like Section 92 to gain control of their own resources, to go it alone when Ottawa would be a saboteur. And I gave some concrete case studies how British Columbia, as well as Quebec in the 60s and the 70s, was able to do such things. And I think that that approach and way of thinking does involve a combat, a fight, because they're not going to, or Ottawa never just lets it happen. And if by whatever reason that is not possible to utilize those constitutional powers, then I'm thinking that people should be able to organize for possibly a full-blown declaration or movement of independence accordingly.
Alberta needs to become independent. And the particular theme I was talking about today had to do with how many things Albertans have tried in the past to reform Canada, and the door's been shut. And we've tried so many things, and in particular, I focus on the Reform Party of Canada and Senate Reform in Canada. These were things we worked on for several years, and they were not successful, not because there was anything wrong with the people doing the reforming from Alberta, but because Central Canada was not interested in the kind of reforms we wanted. And since we've tried these things and we can't get anything done this way, I think the only option we have left is for Alberta to become independent, especially because of the federal election and because of the changes that Daniel Smith has brought in for the referendum to be easier to accomplish than previously. This is the furthest we've ever come in terms of moving towards steps that would lead us toward independence. So I think things are still building in that direction. It seems favorable at this point. And so this is the most encouraged I've ever been in terms of looking towards a realistic possibility of Alberta becoming independent. Historically, going back to the 80s, at least early 80s, independence-minded people would often divide among different groups and then behind different leaders. And by fragmenting the movement that way, it would dissipate its energies. And, there's some of that happening right now. I mean, part of that is human nature, right? You have different people with different ideas, and that's completely legitimate when you have different leaders with different ideas. But there does have to be some kind of common goal, a pursuit of a common goal, and that's the only way we'd ever be able to achieve Alberta independence.
The federal government has made positive overtures, but there's always a caveat. There's always an if or a but or an asterisk that suddenly means there's no certainty. And so I think Albertans are one spit and twice shy on promises of action, and what they're looking for is actual action that will actually take place. And it has to happen soon. It can't just be promise of future action. So I think that's what people are looking for. And I also think that there's a real risk that if the federal government builds up hope by making statements that sound positive and then turn out to just be a turn of phrase or a cleverly worded political statement that makes it sound like they care, but actually they don't deliver, that could actually make things a whole lot worse.
We need to really take responsibility for what sacrifices were made to give us the freedoms that we currently have, which many people, I think, take for granted. And I think when we take ownership of that current of history and all of those people who gave and sacrificed so much, we can better appreciate that every real freedom comes with responsibilities to defend it and then improve and pass it upon to the future generations. And I think just that change of identity is the first and foremost point of becoming a sovereign person that could then qualify you to becoming a sovereign citizen that engages within the political structures of your society.
We've got a cultural decline in the last several decades where Canadians are less aware of history. You've got some people that are so ignorant of history that they have this naive trust in government, and they really believe government can do us no wrong. Government is always benevolent, always a force for good. And so we need to change our culture. We need to educate ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, to appreciate that the free society is actually superior to a repressive regime. And I think a lot of Canadians have lost sight of that difference.
The time is ripe now to get Alberta out of Canada, and I think we have a very unique opportunity, given that that we're confident that the Trump administration fully supports this project, and I don't think we're going to have this level of support, potentially ever again from a U.S. administration. And I think we really need to strike while the iron is hot. Let's face it, Mark Carney is an existential threat to Albertans and Alberta. He's going to destroy this province. He's going to bankrupt all of us. And you notice you don't hear him talking about, oil and gas corridors. It's energy corridors. So he and Brookfield are very heavily, I think, invested in the idea of modular nuclear. So, I'm sure what we're going to see is high tension power lines running from coast to coast with, basically modular nuclear plants as repeater stations to keep the amps up. And, that's how he's going to basically, run his no more gas powered car program by 2030. Let's face it, if we added just 100,000 new electric vehicles to the Alberta power grid, it would crash the power grid. So, without a massive amount of new electricity, which I'm sure is what Carney and Brookfield and all the crony capitalists are planning on, this stupid idea of theirs of getting rid of gas-powered vehicles in minus 40-degree Alberta wouldn't come to fruition. So, all of this is, just a massive, get-rich-quick scheme on behalf of Carney and all of his crony capitalists who, under the guise of World Economic Forum, so so-called stakeholder capitalism. And for those people that study history, go back and look at what Mussolini was doing in Italy with, the Everybody Together program, otherwise known as fascism. I mean, that's what Mark Carney stands for, and what Mark Carney's stakeholder capitalism and crony capitalism stand for. It's nothing more or less than a fascist program that he intends to foist on Alberta, and we need to get out before he does.
Hope you enjoyed what they had to say. Let me know in the comments what you think the most important thing is for those in Western Canada to think about when it comes to independence. For Rebel News, I'm Sidney Fizard. DoneGettingScrewed.com is where you have to go if you want to see the latest on our coverage for Western independence movement stories like the one behind us that keep on going. They're waiting for that referendum next year. They are putting everything into it. So if you want to see our coverage from now till the time this actually goes through for a referendum, go to DoneGettingScrewed.com.